Star family. Today's video is going to take a look at a topic that is slightly controversial, perhaps even volatile, depending on how much you have invested in the narrative of tropical astrology. I'd like to take a look today at tropical astrology. Now, I know tropical astrology is a topic that's been really looked at from a lot of different angles. You know, people talk about what they think it might describe. People talk about the relevance that it has and how it works for them, how it's accurate. And people talk against those points too, arguing that sidereal astrology oriented to the stars is much more in line with the idea implied in the name astrologos, the logic or language of the stars. All of this has been covered before, and I'm not going to touch any of that. What I want to look at in this video is the historical context that tropical astrology arose within. And I want to examine a little bit, in a brief overview, the debate, the conversation, the dialogue and dialectic that led to the codification of today's tropical zodiac, which is the most widely used zodiac in the world of Western astrology. So, because I'm going to look and give an overview on a historical period, I have some notes, pretty loosely organized, but there's a lot of dates, and we're going to be looking at a period of time in ancient Greece, which spawned the philosophical and intellectual environment in which the conversation that ended with Claudius Ptolemy putting his stick in the ground for tropical astrology, the context in which that conversation happened. We're going to look at this period of time. We're going to look at the we're going to start with Socrates. He was born in 470 BC. So I want to paint a broader picture here. There was no unified Greece at this time. There were just city-states. Greece was unified by Philip II of Macedon in 337 before the Common Era. So at this time, like the time of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, what was really happening was there was a Greek, we think of it today as a civil war, because it was a war between two Greek city-states, Sparta and Athens, but there was no nation of Greece yet. There was no unified Greece yet. There was the Athenians and the Spartans. In this Greek civil war, the Peloponnesian War ended in about 400 before the Common Era. To put that into context of the birth of philosophy, as we know it, we have Socrates born in 470. We have Plato born in 428. We have Aristotle born in 384 before Common Era. So from 470 to, roughly 300, we have this period where in Athenian history, this actually at this time, right around 400, concordant with the end of the Peloponnesian War, Athenian democracy fell. It fell. So that's like the context of Socrates. Socrates arose and taught before the fall, and Plato. Well, let's start at the beginning. Let's start with Socrates. Socrates was born in 470 before the Common Era. And just to paint just a really rough picture of him, he taught elites. He taught the aristocracy. He taught the intellectual and academic elites of his day. And he was kind of the guy that sat in the middle of the square with like a prove me wrong sign and would just debate people. And he didn't really have he didn't really espouse a lot of like ultimate ideas of his own. He was looking for ultimate ideas, but he felt that rhetoric and debate were the way to approach ultimate truth. And if you approached him, he would pretty well deconstruct your ideas. He would just show his opponents how they were logically flawed or foolish. Plato was his student, and they were both analogous to like right wingers today. They criticized Athenian democracy, and Athenian democracy was like, well, okay, so ordinarily democracy gets stronger when you criticize it, but remember, um, Greece fell right after the Republic, the Athenian Republic fell right after in the chaos after the Peloponnesian War, and this was a time when democracy in Greece had given way to like oligarchy, like these elites. In fact, the elites that Socrates taught were, I think, when the Athenian Republic was overthrown by the 30 tyrants, it came out later that the 30 tyrants were all students of Socrates. It's actually why he was tried for impiety, right? Disturbing the natural order, disturbing the order of things. Socrates was convicted and sentenced to death by hemlock by the Senate once the Republic had been like reestablished. Once Grecian Athenian democracy had been reestablished after this 30 tyrants overthrow. So Socrates was part of that. Then you have Plato. Plato, again, born 428. 428. So he would have been about 24 when the democracy fell. He was an Athenian royal. He was like a high-minded guy, but unlike Socrates, his teacher, he favored mathematical approaches to truth. So Socrates was trying to reason and rhetoric the truth. Plato was like, no. Let's apply mathematics. He's very aristocratically minded. Plato is very aristocratically minded, and he's very, very profoundly anti-democratic, as anyone who's read The Republic knows. He wanted a caste system. He wanted philosopher kings to rule every aspect of life, education, home. He was an idealist. And his ideas have been criticized because they presuppose a philosopher king without really establishing a social system that would lead to the production of one. In fact, it's been argued that Marcus Aurelius alone fulfilled his ideal philosopher king role in all of Roman history. Of all the Roman emperors, there's only ever one. So Plato might have had high idealistic ideas based on the perfection of society, but his student Aristotle had much more down to earth and appealing to like a much broader range of people. So Aristotle was born in 384, before the Common Era. So he would have been 30 years old when Alexander the Great was born. He would have been concordant with Philip II, who unified Greece and created the army with which Alexander fought the Persians and conquered the known world. Okay, so circling back around to Aristotle. Aristotle was more of a centrist. He was more of a pragmatist. He was really wary of extremes. He was wary of extreme democracy. He said, if you let the people be in charge, you have mob rule. But he was critical of oligarchy. He found that it led to corruption. So he didn't promote these elites into positions of power based, strictly on their elite status. He didn't promote monarchy either. He saw that monarchy taken to an extreme led to tyranny. Aristotle promoted a lot of older ideas. Actually, he may have had ideas of his own. I'm not implying that he didn't, but what he was famous for was kind of codifying a lot of ideas, kind of making official a lot of ideas. He had the stamp of Plato, he had the stamp of the Platonic Academy on him, and he was a very, it seemed, charismatic person. He was a centrist, a bit of a centrist, and he's a little different from Socrates and Plato in that regard. Like I said, his presentation was a lot more appealing to a broader range of people, a lot more just like ground level in his things than in his ideas than Plato was. Nonetheless, and here's where we get to the importance of Aristotle. This guy had an education. He could think, he could reason, he was a polymath. He knew what made great theater, he knew what made great art, he knew if science was sound or not, or so he thought. Because here we get to the main critique of the context in which Tropical arose, and that was it was predicated on an Aristotelian logic. Now, even though Aristotle was, a well-smart guy, sure, he taught ideas that became dogma for centuries, which means that the incorrect teachings, the things that we know today, are actually false. The Aristotle's fake news also became dogmatic doctrine and scientific truth for centuries, millennia after his death. I want to get into a brief and impartial list of the things that Aristotle taught. Women have fewer teeth than men. Untrue. Eels do not reproduce, but are spontaneously generated from mud. Did you know? I guess he couldn't find their sex organs on examination. Bees, sacred insect to many goddess cultures. Interestingly, the bee is an interesting symbol. Bees are led by a king bee, leads the hive, while the workers are female. Okay, and now if you're getting like a sense of the flavor of misogyny in Aristotle, like we're just scratching the surface of the tip of an iceberg. That's it. This is the scratch on the surface of the tip of an iceberg. Aristotle taught that females were deformed or deficient males. And to support that, he taught that men have hotter blood than women. And in reproduction, males contribute the soul, while females only the form. Inferior, of course. Aristotle taught that women were emotionally and rationally deficient, thus unfit for politics and public life, rather better at home in a servile role. Aristotle taught that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones. Which falls faster, a ton of feathers or a ton of bricks? Galileo disproved that, by the way. And Aristotle was a total eternalist. He taught that everything was always this way, that everything that lived had always lived, and that the world had always been the way it was. This was like beginningless and timeless, and he was a total eternalist. He dismissed fossil evidence of extinct species, and he taught that everything was always thus. He taught that void space could not exist. It did not exist. He taught that a vacuum is impossible, famously stating, nature abhors a vacuum. There's reasons for him to say that, but what he taught around that, see, it's like a kernel of truth. Like it looks true, it's truthy. Anyway, maybe he was doing the best he could. We can't say. I wasn't there. All I know is that a vacuum is possible and void space does exist. Aristotle taught that slaves were just, and I quote, natural slaves who lacked the capacity for anything else. He taught it right and just that those with superior reasoning enslave those without, right? Weaponizing logic and rhetoric against those who didn't have it. He taught that all matter in the universe is drawn towards the center of the universe. Facts. And like Plato in the Timaeus, he taught a geocentric model of the solar system and the whole universe. The whole universe. So his explanation for gravity was that Earth sits at the center of the universe and that matter is compelled towards the center by forces, right? Like cause, bro, because I told you so. That was his idea. That's his idea. But the thing is, the problem with this is that it gained so much currency that 75 years after Aristotle, Aristarchus of Samos and his student Archimedes correctly recognized the architecture of a solar system. And due to the powerful appeal of Plato and Aristotle, their findings were dismissed. They were not popular. Aristarchus and Archimedes knew the order of the planets, that it didn't hinge on the Earth and rotate around it, but that rather the sun was a star like all the others. They knew this. And famously, Cleanthes, a Stoic philosopher, suggested that Aristarchus be tried for impiety. You'll remember the charge of impiety because Socrates was put to death for this, disturbing the order of the universe. Okay, Plutarch wrote about this, how Aristarchus was, faced death threats for talking about the truth. This was the environment, the philosophical and rhetorical environment that Aristotle fostered. So we can question Aristotle. We can't lionize Aristotle. We can't glorify Aristotle. We have to question Aristotle. So we're going to fast forward from this point, the age of this Greek turbulence and the emergence of a new republic, a new philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, a foundation to move forward on. Yeah, sounds good. But let's fast forward to about 190 before the Common Era. This is the birth of Hipparchus of Rhodes. Now, Hipparchus was an astronomer, a mathematician, a geographer, and he is the founder of trigonometry. And he notices in his astronomical observations that the star Spica, Alpha Virgo Spica, has moved slightly from ancient records. Now, he was a geographer, and in this lineage of wisdom that he inherited, there were ways to cite star positions on a certain date of the year from a certain peak, and say past that other peak, it's like 6 degrees to the west. And, he was out doing his measurements and found Spica to be like 12 degrees west. Like he knew it was wrong, but he didn't know why. Now, this starts a debate about, oh shit, the stars are moving. They thought those stars were fixed. They talked about the travelers, the moving stars, which we today call planets. But to them, the fixed stars, oh, they were so fixed. So this Hipparchus discovery opened a real can of worms. And the debate started, and the debate was like, do the stars move? Here's the questions that they were asking over the course of the next 300 years. How do the stars move, right? They watched moving planets do a 2 steps forward, 1 step back thing, right? Retrograde motion. So they theorized that perhaps the stars also, like the planets, move in a wobble. So the questions they asked were, do the stars move directly? Do the stars wobble? Do they all move at the same speed? The essential question they were asking is, how do the stars move? Now, context is important here to understanding this debate. Aristotle, remember, had defined the Earth as the central feature, a cosmos that rotated around it. And this limitation, which was presumed to be true by almost everyone, defined the philosophical context that they were able to engage the debate within. So remember that according to Plato, everything is based on perfection. And Aristotle further established this geocentric worldview that Plato had theorized in Timaeus. A likely story, he called it, one of the greatest. Hipparchus then, building on this worldview, proposed that the stars move from their position. So for 300 years, people debated this. And over the course of that 300 years, what really happened was that faith, trust in the stars as markers, like, diminished. And faith and trust at the same time that the world, that the earth, terra firma, was the perfect epicenter of the universe, that went completely unchallenged. So they still had faith and trust that the earth was very special, but they lost faith and trust in the ability of the stars to mark a fixed position. Okay, so keep that idea in mind, because approximately 300 years after Hipparchus of Rhodes, the debate still raging, Claudius Ptolemy was born in Alexandria, Egypt. And at this time, Alexandria was Roman occupied, part of the Roman Empire. This was about 100 of the Common Era, about 300 years after Hipparchus of Rhodes. And the debate that Hipparchus set off was a major feature of astronomy and astrology in Ptolemy's time. You got to understand, this debate lasted longer than the United States has from its inception to today when I make this video. This debate lasted longer than the United States. Okay, 300 years. And it was the major question of Ptolemy's time. It didn't define astrology and astronomy, but it was a major feature. It was part of the conversation, and Ptolemy settled it. Ptolemy settled this debate. He reasoned that you couldn't trust the stars because they moved. And he promoted the idea that the zodiac be fixed somehow to the earth, which he thought did not move, terra firma, and was the epicenter of Platonic perfection, that which all matter sought. So even though astrology means the language or logic of the stars, literally, the craft itself was separated from the stars and fixed to the earth itself around 150, the Common Era. So, all right, well, here's a neat glimpse into historical context. In the year 150 of the Common Era, in Rome, Italy, Alexandria, or anywhere else, the vernal equinox is the sunrise on the northern hemisphere vernal equinox is actually at 0 degrees Aries. And so there's no big deal at all in doing this. They thought they were doing astrology a favor. And in the thinking of the philosophy of the day, right, the philosophy du jour, he sealed this deal, and it seemed like an irrefutable argument. It's like the heavens agreed. It seemed sound. It seemed beneficial to astrology. Claudius Ptolemy was a hero. So what happened next, right? Well, Rome, let's see, the really short version is Rome destabilized and fell. Literacy and numeracy was lost outside of elites like Nostradamus, and out of priesthoods. Priesthoods have numeracy and literacy. And we fast forward to the Renaissance, which is 1500 to 1600, very roughly. And the Enlightenment is the late 1600s, the 1700s. And they are going back. They're returning to the sources. This was the literal battle cry of the Renaissance masters, ad fontes, to the sources, to the Greek, to Ptolemy, to get this guy out of the library and into practice, right? But they return to the original Greek sources only to find out from our ancient masters of wisdom that the astrological zodiac officially begins with the northern hemisphere vernal equinox, which marks 0 Aries. Okay, so what happened then? Okay, you have to understand this. We got to look at this as it moves through time. Here is the vernal equinox in 150 when Ptolemy said, oh, let's orient this to the earth. That's way more trustworthy. Okay, so it's marking the vernal equinox is marking 0 Aries. So yeah, so what happened then? Well, here's the funny thing that Claudius Ptolemy didn't seem to presuppose. He didn't seem to anticipate this. The stars did move and continued to move in one direction. And actually the position of the northern hemisphere vernal equinox literally moves over time. It moves the other direction. So today, this is the tropical zodiac here, defined by 0 Aries equals northern hemisphere vernal equinox. And what we see is that the sign of Aries is correspondent with the stars of Pisces. Like Pisces, sign Pisces is actually the stars of the water bearer, Aquarius. And the whole way around, here's sign Aquarius. What's this? Constellation Capricorn. Okay. And we call the zodiac that aligns the stars of Capricorn to the sign of Aquarius and so on. We call this tropical astrology as compared to sidereal astrology, which orients to the stars themselves. I'm going to give an example, some examples of a sidereal zodiac. Way to take a look at this. Here's one way. This is a Fagan-Bradley 12 even sign sidereal zodiac, which orients to the stars, sidereal, the stars. We're still looking at the vernal equinox, but you'll see it doesn't define 0 Aries because the northern hemisphere vernal equinox is, the sunrise on that date is nowhere near 0 Aries. The sunrise on that date is almost through Pisces. We're almost into the age of Aquarius. Yeah, so there are other ways to approach the sky, and sidereal calculation is one of them. Another option is just going straight up constellational. This also gets branded true sidereal, true sky, and a whole bunch of other stuff, but it's just constellations. We take the constellations as the sign boundaries. We take the stars themselves. So you see Aries smaller than Pisces, and the whole way around you see Libra smaller than Virgo, taking up less ecliptic real estate. And this is another way to approach. And a lot of the practitioners of these kinds of astrology see this as a correction, as a sort of, today we can get a view of the past that's a little more elevated, and with that bird's eye view, we can call into question some of the things that, even Claudius Ptolemy would have taken completely for granted. So I wanted to give this general overview of some of the important factors that have led to the development of tropical astrology today. I am not trying to profess what tropical is good for. Rudolf Steiner famously used it for agriculture since it conforms to the seasons consistently. But astrology is a personal journey. And if it speaks to you, listen. If tropical does good for you, then tropical's done good for me. But part of that good was leading me towards a more accurate understanding of where the planets were relative to the signs and how that related to the actual living skies. So I'm not trying to create dogma here. If tropical people are like, ooh, I'm attempting to offer one perspective, mine, just on why someone might question or choose to disregard tropical astrology and realign with the stars. I could be incorrect or misinformed, and I encourage you all to ask your own questions and discover for yourselves as much as you can about this. My idea is that in the ancient world, when they said Aries, they meant Aries, not Pisces. So my question is, why today would we apply their understandings of that section of the sky to Pisces? Why we apply Aries to Pisces today? That's an open question. Our ideas about astrology all have a sidereal basis and origin. That's historical fact. Sidereal predates tropical as the foundation of tropical. So since all of our astrological ideas have a sidereal basis and origin, why would we apply those ideas today to tropical? I don't have those answers. I only have those questions. I'm a rational person. I'm in the time will tell camp, because what's going to happen over time is that the northern hemisphere vernal equinox will continue drifting in one direction, and the stars are going to continue drifting in the other. And 12,000 years from now, tropical astrologists are going to have to spin a really difficult data set and talk about why Aries is actually Libra, Pisces is actually Virgo, and they're going to have a harder time rationalizing this. This is a prediction that tropical astrology will get harder to rationalize as history proceeds. And I think that at a certain point it will just exhaust its utility. That's a theory that I have. That's just an idea. I invite fans of tropical and sidereal and anyone who's considered these matters to chime in the comments. I know the YouTube comments aren't a place for intelligent people or discourse, but I challenge you to try if you're so moved. And I invite this. I also invite any corrections to the historical timeline or to ideas that I may have expressed in my very, very brief, very general overview of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who formed the foundation of a philosophical worldview that shaped the emergence of tropical astrology. So thank you, everybody, for your attention to all these astronomical and astrological details. Some of this might seem to be minutia. I would argue it's relevant. It's relevant. Yeah, thanks. Bye.